Morning, everybody. Good morning. This is the Subcommittee on Transportation Appropriations meeting, jointly with the Transportation Policy Committee. So appreciate everybody being here. Feel free, committee members, to move up to the front where the packets are out on the table. If you don't have one in front of you, they're on the first 3 rows, or first 2 rows, it looks like. Appreciate our staff, David and Danny, making those available to all of us. And like I said, I'm John LaHood, Chair of the Subcommittee on Appropriations. Good to be with you. We're going to hear presentations today from the DOT and CERTA. And I've got Chairman Rick Jaspers with us, and I'm going to ask him to, if he has any remarks.
Just real quickly, thank you members for being here so early, and thank you Chairman LaHood for putting us together. I know it'll help Russell, Janine, with their time, not having to come to another committee meeting. If we can go ahead and knock this out. I just want to recognize we have a DOT board member, Joe Stein, from Forsyth County. Joe, will you stand up so they can see you and welcome you for you being here today. And members, I want to also let you recognize Danny Nichols. Danny's right down here on the end. You can stand up so they can see you. You know, she's our policy analyst, this year, and we're glad to have her. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Back to you.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Chairman. I second what Chairman Jaspers has said. We lost Abby Day, who had been here for I had to call her out. Yep. She was a wealth of knowledge to me as my first year in this role last year, but Danny and David have really picked the ball up, and I don't think we've skipped a beat. Abby, so you prepared us all very well, so thank you. We will go ahead and get started. We have an hour. We're already 7 minutes into it because Rules is meeting in here at 9. So Commissioner McMurray, if you'll go ahead and come up and present show us your presentation.
To both chairmen, thank you for combining this. We do appreciate that. Nothing like efficiency, so thank you all for pulling this together. But I do want to take a point of privilege just for a minute to thank the women and men of GDOT and of all state government, in fact, for the work that's been going on since last Thursday to Friday, where we started getting ready for this winter weather. And they did a fantastic job. The dedication and commitment of the men and women of GDOT is just outstanding. We had people that left home on Friday morning, and some of those are just going back home today. So we bring up our crews from Tifton and Jessup districts. Anytime there's a winter weather event across Metro Atlanta, they come up and they're actually brining and plowing the interstates here in Metro Atlanta, and our other districts work our way north. So they did a fantastic job. I've yet to get the final numbers, but we put over 2 million gallons of brine out, and at one point we were about 3,500 tons of salt, 2,500 tons of aggregate spread, and again continual 12-hour shifts. This morning, and there's still, I believe, as of the report I had this morning, I think 7 state routes that are still closed at some point. Those hardest hit counties still are Habersham, White, Union, Towns, Rabun, sort of that northeast Georgia corner. We call it the Golden Triangle from where I'm from, a beautiful place, but still dealing with that. Power lines, trees and power lines, but working to get those roads open. And also a big shout out to our GEMA team who leads, they're the quarterback. GEMA for leading this, and the Department of Natural Resources and Georgia Forestry Commission for their chainsaw strike teams. They've been working very hard to get the trees out of the road so we could get the roads cleared out. So just wanted to acknowledge that. What I want to do today is walk you through some important data points relating to transportation and the cost of doing business, because we really need to understand those costs as it informs us in the budgeting process. And I want to also share some of the outputs and some of the outcomes from 2 budget years, the current budget year and last budget year, to show you how we're deploying the resources that you have afforded us when you approve the budgets. And then finally, I'll just jump into this budget, this amended budget year, amended FY26. And when I spoke here to Joint Appropriations, I talked about acknowledging some realities. So one of the realities I need to acknowledge is what's happening on the federal front, because the federal funding to Georgia DOT is still very important at somewhere around $1.5 to $1.6 billion a year. And we all know that the federal budget year begins on October 1st. And I think everybody is aware at the federal level that we're operating under a continuing resolution to January 30th. And when we work under continuing resolutions federally, the way the money flows from the federal government is they give you a daily pro rata share of your total budgeted amount. And so you get 1/365th share for the days to get us through January 30th. Well, that's really not a way to run a business, because when we do a project, we need to fully fund a project. I can't give a daily prorated share to a project. Now, I think everybody has seen at Congress last week, the House passed a minibus that had 4 big budget programs in it, and that included the U.S. Department of Transportation, which has the federal funding in it. That did pass the House. I think you've seen the headlines recently. The Senate seems to maybe want to decouple one of those budget programs out of that minibus that's passed. And so I'm not sure what that means, but it means we're getting really close to to January 30. And if it doesn't happen, then there potentially again a government shutdown or the stop of money. So we're watching that very closely. The other thing we do every year is the federal government allows you to do an IOU. And so basically you can pay it forward with a Georgia dollar, and when the federal budget passes, the federal government will reimburse you for the money that you expended. They approve everything along the way except the money. They just say, here's an IOU. And when we get to this point of the calendar year, we pay it forward to keep projects moving. We want to keep projects moving as fast as we can and not delay projects, but we're using our state budget to do that. And at this point of the year, we've used and consumed our state budget, which should be federal, and our state budget to do state-funded projects. So we're about to, we don't want to get ahead of our skis and expend all our money waiting on the federal dollar. So it gets to be a tricky point of delivery. Very complicated budgeting process, certainly accounting process, but just wanted to highlight that, because if there's a shutdown at this point or this gets delayed more, it will impact our ability to advance projects, either design right away and certainly for construction phases on federally funded projects. So if that's not good news enough, on this next slide, I'm going to take you a deep dive early in the morning into a chart here that I've shown both the subcommittee and the Transportation Committee over the last few years, and it's really the inflationary costs related to transportation. So this complicated chart comes from Federal Highway Administration, and the red line tracks actually the cost of doing business from around the nation for highway construction. So they index the cost of highway construction from actual bid data from every state. And so you can see that's the red line. And since 2021, it's increased by about 70%. So the index has gone up 70%. So you can say there's it costs 70% more on average across the nation than it did in 2021. The CPI that everybody knows about and understands is that blue line. So I think it's pretty staggering when you see what CPI is doing compared to what the cost of construction is. The other index here is the dashed sort of yellow line across the bottom, sort of gold, maybe sort of orangey looking. That's the employment cost index. So that's another index of the cost of employment. And then the green line is called the producer price index, which is a key indicator for inflation based on the production of level of goods, like from mining, manufacturing, and ag as well. So those are sort of an indicator. But what's interesting about this is you can see that the red line, the highway construction cost index, outpaced all those others, especially from about 2022 on. So what does that mean locally here in Georgia? We're probably a little better than average on a few things and worse than average, that red line on some. And let me just talk through a couple of those. This chart looks back to FY21 to FY25. And just simple resurfacing a 2-lane road has increased in cost by 51%. So right now, to do a 2-lane road, it's about $251,000 a mile to do 2 lanes, 1 lane in each direction. Widening from 2 lanes to 4 lanes, either if it's urban or in a rural setting, our actual low bid pricing has increased 99% for urban and about 90% for rural widening. So basically practically doubled in cost over those last 4 budget years. Roundabouts, we talked about roundabouts. Chairman Powell and I were just talking about roundabouts. You can see that they've increased by about 47%, and we compare that to the paved surface. So, you know, over those last 4 years. And bridges are important to everybody. I'm going to talk more about bridges. Bridge replacements increased by about 93%. So you can just see in those 4 years this really increased cost. Down at the bottom of the small table at the bottom is some of the breakouts of the components of these projects, such as asphalt, aggregate, you know, storm drain pipes, bridge beams, and guardrail. And you can see they range from 90% on pipes and things like that to a low of about 35% for guardrail metal. And that number actually has come down. Steel prices were really high back at the beginning after COVID, and they have retreated some back. So again, I'll just show you this to show you, as we think about budget, is how far does the money go, what are we using it for? You can sort of see the realities of that. This next chart is we took that red line from that first chart I showed you and then indexed the budget, our state budget, compared over that same time frame. And it's no surprise, basically what I told you is the construction costs have gone here, and our budget has increased, thank goodness for that, over the years. So the inflation nationally has increased for construction about 70%, our budget about 30%, so that gives you the difference of the loss of buying power, if you will, to do what we need to do. So what does this really mean and translate? And I showed this at Joint Appropriations, and Janine Miller's here, who you'll hear from in a little bit. But working through the planning process in her role as the planning director, we have to live in a 4-year fiscally constrained budget process of physical constraint versus project. So when project costs go up, what happens is we have to take a project and move it from the current year it's in to the next year is usually what we do. And then when you do that, you just pushed another project out of the next year because you were already constrained, physically constrained. That line across the middle of those boxes is physical constraint. So this increased cost has just caused us to cascade projects out. And I sort of joked around at Joint Appropriations saying, I'm pretty sure each of your projects is the most important project in the state in your district, more so than your counterpart next to you. So y'all can debate that later, but I got a feeling your project's number one. So it's never fun when we have to come tell you that, well, we're having to shift your project out a year or two, and simply because of the funding situation of these increased costs, with even, again, increased revenue at the state level. Federal level is a whole other story I won't get into at this moment, but that's sort of the process we have to go through, which is never fun, and of course, anything we can do to advance projects sooner than later. Now here's the good news story. I want to go back because, again, with a sincere thank you to both the House and the Senate and the governor's budget, the last 2 years with the state general fund infusion in amended 24 of $1.5 billion and $1 billion last year's amended budget, you can see now that our budget line went above the National Highway Construction Cost Index for the last 2, which means we didn't lose ground, that we actually maybe gained a little bit of ground on these last 2 budget years. But the difference between there on 2020 to about 2023, where we're below, means we still have more projects ready to go than we have budget for. But I just can't say enough about those last 2 budget years from leadership from the House, the Senate, and the governor to put that money in the budget to do what it's going to do. So let me show you what that money's done. Again, trying to set the table as we look forward on the amended 26 budget. We look back at those amended budgets, 24 and 25, and this is where the money went. $98 million went to airport aid. We always have about 3 times more requests than we have funding for airport aid. And so this was a big step. About half of that money, though, went to a replacement airport down in Griffin, Spalding County, that if we did not have the money, the Federal Aviation Administration was going to take back their commitment of funding, which was a big part of that. So we were able to secure that FAA funding and leverage those state dollars, and also do a tremendous amount of work around our local airports across the state. The local roads funding is that money to cities and counties. That's LMIG-like, that most of you are familiar with the LMIG money. We send this money out by formula to cities and counties based on population and road miles, $250 million and $265 million respectively, which basically double their LMIG amount. And again, putting it in this budget category called local roads admin took away the match component, because LMIG has a statutory match component, either 10% if you're in a TIA region, which many of you are in, and if you're not in a TIA region, it was a 30%. But the local roads admin did not require match. We got that money out very quickly in both years, and most all that money was used by cities and counties for resurfacing. Again, state of good repair. Their reality has been the same as ours, increased paving cost. The next bucket there is the freight program, which is a big program at $500 million each year, which was a new program that was stood up just a couple of budget years ago, coming out of the freight and logistics plan that we did, which came through Chairman Jasper's committee and basically moved forward to establish a new freight budget program for us. I'm going to come back to that one in a moment. Next is the capital construction. 593 was in amended 24 to address the very thing I just showed you, where we had to cascade projects out into the future because we didn't have money. In fact, out of that $593 million, we were able to advance 44 projects. 25 of those projects, the 44, were ones that were just delayed, that they were ready to go, we just needed the money. And in fact, when we did those 25 projects, from where they were budgeted, we sped them up by 40 project years. So if a project was sitting in 2 fiscal years out and we moved it in, we call that 2 project years. So 25 projects accelerated by 40 project years, which is amazing. And we know the longer you wait, the more it costs as well. And we also added 19 project phases that we know we needed to be working on, but we just didn't have money to get started. So that's where that money went. Capital maintenance was $50 million in amended 24 to address that resurfacing numbers I was telling you about, it being 51% more. So that helped us there. And last and very importantly, as I was talking about Representative Taylor just a minute ago, the $200 million for Hurricane Helene and Debbie cleanup and the storms we had in southeast Georgia went into our maintenance budget. And without that money, we would absolutely have been devastated in hurricane cleanup. In fact, still, I talked to Columbia County just yesterday, or had a request from Columbia County. We're still dealing with those impacts of those costs that are still out there. And as I told Joint Appropriations, so far we've had about $48 million from FEMA reimbursement. And so here we are a year and a half or so post that, and still, working on reimbursement. So this money was very, very important. Now, that's what you appropriated, and that's where we're going to use it. Let me show you how it's been utilized. The maintenance money, this is expended. So these are dollars in and actually paid out to contractors. 100% of that money's been done. The capital construction, that 593, 69% of that outlay has gone out, meaning work has been done. And then the last 2 categories are the freight, that $500 million in each year. As you can see, those numbers are sort of lagging a little behind, but there's a reason for that. Again, that was a new budget program, and we're advancing a lot of projects there that were freight ready. And then several of the big ones on the next slide, or what I call the big 3 out of that, are projects that we will bid this calendar year. So these projects will come to bid this calendar year. The first one is I-16, which is roughly $516 million, which is a combination of amended 24 funds and amended 25 funds to widen 31 miles of I-16 from I-95 there down in Savannah, at least up to the Hyundai Meta plant. Our goal is to do a variable Fixed price variable scope contracting, so we say this is how much money we have and the contractor bids how far they can go. So a very innovative way to try to make sure we maximize these dollars. As we all know, I-16 has a tremendous amount of trucks, 23% trucks in that area, and we know adding this third lane down there will reduce delay by about 56% now and in the future. So again, very important for our economic opportunity that comes out of the port and everything that's moving, that freight moving up I-16. So that's one project. The next one is I-95, $74 million to widen I-95 from I-16 to South Carolina. South Carolina is currently under construction to build 8 lanes on their side. We have 6 lanes on the Georgia side. So we're syncing those up again with traffic volumes down there that will continue to expand and grow due to all the freight commerce that comes out of the port. And lastly, out of the big 3 is $135 million to complete the last segment of State Route 96, which is that connection from I-75 to I-16 south of Macon. There in Houston and Twiggs County, we have this project ready to bid. It's about 9 miles with a major river crossing in there too. So those are sort of the big 3 that consume most of that freight budget. And that's why those numbers were lagging a little further behind. But you can see that this calendar year we'll be getting that work out the door and seeing those dollars used. Now, Mr. Chairman, let me get into the amended 26 budget from the governor's recommendation. And again, I'm super excited and very grateful for the governor putting in roughly $2.3 billion of additional state general fund money into the GDOT budget. And so let me walk through sort of the big buckets of where that's going. Starting with $100 million to address rural bridge replacements. And so we have literally, hundreds of millions, if not more, of bridge projects that we know we need to do, but we don't have the funding to do. And so this $100 million is going to be used strategically to support ag and timber industry in the rural parts of the state. So we're going through the process now of doing a triage of where are these bridges. We're trying to make sure they're tied directly to some ag production or some timber facility production that we're replacing bridges strategically. So it's taken us a little bit of time. I know I wished I could give you the list of what that is today, but we're working through that because we're doing several sieves and analysis of saying, okay, what does this one serve? What's this bridge? So this will be a combination of county bridges and state route bridges, but really try to, again, strategically advance those. And our goal would be that we would deploy these bridges either in this budget year or next budget year to be bid. Not put them all out at one time, but make sure we could be strategic about getting these bridges, $100 million of strategic bridge investment out over this budget year and next. Next was $200 million to the 316 corridor. For the last 6 to 7 years, we've been really focused on trying to improve safety along State Route 316 in Gwinnett, Barrow, and Oconee counties, roughly 40 some odd miles between Athens and sort of metro Atlanta there in Gwinnett. What we've been doing is trying to address the safety concerns that exist. I'll get into that by replacing intersections that have traffic lights with either interchanges or overpasses or making some kind of other access improvements along this very critical corridor. And our focus at first was where the traffic signals are, because that's where the most congestion is, that's where you have a lot of crashes. And so we've been underway. And on this next slide, you can sort of see all the intersections from left to right, 32 some odd intersections along 316, where the traffic really varies greatly from about almost 30,000 vehicles per day up to 108,000 vehicles per day, with 12% of those being trucks. So it is a freight corridor. But the staggering number here is there's about 1,300 crashes per year on this segment. In our 10 years of data, we went back 10 years, so there's been 65 fatal crashes on this corridor in the last 10 years. If you do that math, that's 6.5 per year. That is not where we want to be. In fact, the crash rates, we look at rates, so that sort of equalizes things around the state. 6 of the intersections are in the top 50 worst offensive intersections for crashes, and 3 more are in the top 100. So you got 9 out of the top 100 worst intersection locations on this corridor. And then the other thing we look at is crash severity. So you have a crash, how bad is it? So the most severe crashes, the ones you don't want to have, 4 of the intersections are higher than the statewide average, and 1 is double the statewide average. So you can see the crash issue we're dealing with from a safety point of view. The good news is 18 of those intersections are actively being addressed or have been addressed. But this last $200 million will go a long way to continue sort of the 12 to 13 remaining intersections that we just really didn't have funding for. If you look down at the bottom right for the legend, I know it may be hard to see, you have sort of the yellow is intermediate and long-term. The yellow intermediate means that we may have like design underway, but we didn't have construction funding or right-of-way. The black is long-term, meaning it's just not funded. So you count those up, there's I think 12 or 13 of those that this $200 million will absolutely allow us to start addressing. So we end up with the entire corridor that is not only improved safety, but also mobility in a growing area, especially in the Barrow and Oconee County areas. Next, out of the state general fund in the governor's budget was the $250 million of local roads administration. Again, that LMIG-like money. I can absolutely tell you that I've heard from ACCG and GMA, they're fully supportive of this, cities and counties, and I've had no city or county complain about this money, by the way. So I think you got unanimous consent that everybody likes the cities and counties. Again, they're facing the same realities we face with increased costs. And the other thing is we get this money out very quickly. We would open the portal probably as soon as the budget is passed, and then shut it off right before July 1, so that the money is committed in this fiscal year, and the cities and counties can have use of it immediately. All right, next. This is a really big one. I shared this same slide at joint appropriations. These are state general fund money that is listed under our budget item, payments to CERTA. You're going to hear from Janine Miller, the executive director of CERTA, in just a little bit, who will provide a lot more detail about some of the data points on I-75 South express lanes. But what I can say about this is this probably been the most popular budget item that I've heard about from many of you and many of my friends. From the announcement the governor made at Eggs and Issues, it appears that everyone is really a big fan of this project, because I do think it has such statewide impact. It affects everybody. If you live south or north, it affects you one way or another. You know, I asked during joint appropriations, did anyone ever think the express lanes was going in the wrong direction? And it got a pretty big chuckle. So I'm assuming that meant yes. But what I can tell you, when the direction that they're going in, most people criticize us, saying those lanes don't look like they should be going the other way. Well, when you open up 2 more lanes where it's 2 lanes wide, you added 67% more capacity, which then makes the normal lanes look more empty than they were, because that's the benefit of having those 2 additional lanes. So it's amazing to see the difference, and they are always going the wrong direction from you if you're going the direction when they're not open, correct? And oh, by the way, it does take us some time to reverse them. It takes an hour to 2 to go through to make sure there's nobody in them, make sure it's safe, and then you have to flip them around. So that's something we have to deal with. Well, this funding absolutely does some critical things. It says on the slide, it's going to, one, we're going to get rid of the reversible lanes and make 2 lanes barrier separated, mind you, meaning there's a concrete barrier between you and the other lanes, the entire 12 miles. That's foundationally what this money is going to do, which gives us the money to do the design work that we have to do the right-of-way acquisition that we have to do, the environmental work that we have to do. This will be a federal environmental document. And then it's going to go to help support the overall construction cost, which will still need a form of finance through CERTA. And that form of finance can come in many forms. It can come through a USDOT TIFIA loan. It could come from toll revenue bonds. But it's going to take more money to do this, and to get that objective of 2 lanes in each direction. Not only that, Chairman Hatchett asked, well, how far will these go? And I'm not sure I answered appropriately. I said Dublin's probably a good place, but the point is, I think you all know that you get stuck, if you're coming north, you get stuck down in Locust Grove at Bill Gardner Parkway. That's where traffic stops. And so we know that we need to go further south with these express lanes. So this amount of money is what we need as a minimum to make sure that we can leverage to do 2 lanes in each direction in the 12 miles, but also, like I mentioned on I-16, we'll make it very innovative that we're going to make sure the money goes as far south as possible to try to, again, because we know you're stopping before you even have the opportunity to get in the express lane. So that's going to be our tact and strategy to do that. So just again, Janine will have a lot more data points about how the system operates today and sort of the data behind it. And we can talk about that one a little bit more after she does her presentations. Now let me just jump into the budget itself. So you've got your track sheet in front of you, before you get there, if you pull that track sheet up, you're going to see the total back on page 3 of the amended budget. And so I always like to remind everybody, in the amended budget year, the $71.6 million increase in excise comes from the audited collections from last year's motor fuel collection. So that gets into our amended budget. So motor fuel is forecast, but then adjusted in the amended year for the actual audited collections from Department of Revenue that comes into us. That's why there's no change in transportation trust fund fees or the transit trust fund fees in the amended budget. Those 2 budget items look back 2 years. What it takes 2-year look back is what we get appropriated in the year. So those will be an adjustment next year. In the state general funds, $2.3 billion, I just highlighted the biggest part of that, but that shows you that brings our total budget to $5.2 billion. Again, very thankful for that state general fund money. This table is sort of a summary of what's on your track sheet. We've aggregated a couple of those budget programs together to show you where the funding is actually used. And so I always like to show this chart. Of course, the payments to CERTA is the big one there at 1.8. There's a few other things in payments to CERTA beside the 1.796 billion. Then capital projects, that's capital construction and capital maintenance at $1.77 billion. Then you have our routine maintenance budget. That is, hey, that's snow and ice right now, but preparation and response. But that's the taking care of the roadsides. I always say that's the taking care of the house, if you will, of doing that, including a lot of maintenance contracting. That's our staff, but also a tremendous amount of maintenance contracting to do what we need to do. Then you can see the LMIG and LRA combined there. And then our general operations of the department, which in this case we've aggregated many budget programs together like department admin, traffic operations, program delivery administration, planning, and data collection. So that's sort of run the department all together. There is some of the traffic operations that do things. We have bond debt, I'll talk about in a minute. We have our intermodal, which is aviation, rail, waterways, and let's say aviation, rail, waterways, transit. So that's where that money is, and then payments to the ATL. So on the next slide, if you want to get your track sheet, we've just taken your track sheet and put it in tabular format here for the presentation. Again, I want to start by saying a big thank you for the governor for recognizing the one-time payment of $2,000 for state employees. We certainly appreciate that. I'm not going to go line through line on those items, but that totals about $8.6 million to GDOT across all the budget programs where people are, and that is so appreciated. We really do appreciate that. So let me start at the top of this table, and I'm just going to highlight a few things. The GO bond debt, I think it's really important to talk about. The good news is you can see that was about $1.1 million reduction in bond debt, meaning that our debt is reduced for GO bond debt. But our total bond debt, or excuse me, our total debt from various kind of bonds is still $1.13 billion. So we still have a pretty good credit card balance there that we're paying down from previous bond packages. So I just want to make sure you're aware of that. Next is capital construction. I'm going to highlight that one because, again, that's where things get built. That increased excise number that you saw on the last slide, we put $36.9 million of that into the capital construction, and then the other plus up was to $200 million in state general fund money for 316. So that increase that $236 million add that's circled. The next circle there is capital maintenance, which is line 47.3 on your track sheet. In capital maintenance, there's the $100 million added for the bridge replacements, rural bridge replacements I talked about. We'd asked for your support to actually get that in budget alignment with the capital construction program. So if we could shift that up into the capital construction program, that would be in alignment with the budget requirements there. And then that was the big change there, where we put that into capital maintenance. Going down to LMIG, LMIG is a minimum of 10% of the excise tax. So with the increased excise from motor fuel collections, we made that $7 million adjustment to the LMIG program. And then, of course, the big circle there is local roads admin that I've already talked about at $250 million. If you want to jump on your track sheet over to line 47.12 or so, then you can see routine maintenance. I want to talk about that again. Very important, taking care of the house, as I said. We took some of the excise, $21.8 million of the excise. We added into routine maintenance just to deal with the increased cost. Those increased costs on construction go right into maintenance. It's the same materials. And also to help with some of our equipment, keeping our equipment up to date as it ages out. And so that's where that's going, plus some money for the $2,000 supplement. So that gives us the $26 million add in routine maintenance. Lastly, circled there is payments to CERTA that we talked about as it relates to the I-75 South Express lanes. So with that, both chairmen, thank you for this opportunity. Again, I want to thank Governor Kemp for his continued third year in a row for leadership of increasing the transportation investment that absolutely keeps Georgia moving ahead, trying to keep our stance of the #1 state to do business, going on the 13th, try to go for the 13th year in a row. And this additional funding absolutely will make lives better for Georgians all across this vast state, not just in Metro Atlanta, but across the entire state. So with that, be glad to entertain any questions at your pleasure.
Thank you, Commissioner. Very thorough report, and appreciate you stewarding, these resources for the state and keeping us safe on the road. And $2.4 billion added to your amended budget. That's a lot.
Yes, sir.
And most of it looks like it's going to the express lanes. And we're a little bit tight on time, so we're going to be brief on the questions and just ask you to be available to the committee,
Yes, sir.
Afterwards. But if you could just explain, briefly, the express lane, the original project, when was that? When was the Peach lane, the express lanes put in? And how does it relate to today's, this new project?
Yeah, so thanks for that question. It was bid in 2013 and opened in 2018. Seems like yesterday, but it's been a minute. So going on 8 years this summer, being open. The original cost was a pretty good bargain. It was about $216 million, sort of all in. But I'll remind you that what we had then was a median that we basically filled in, and there was only a couple of there was one interchange overpass that was redone and one bridge over I-75 that had to be redone. Everything else squeezed in. So you go back to those numbers and you say, wow, why can't we do it for that cost? Well, I look back at that National Highway Construction Cost Index nationally. And over that time, from 2013 to 2024, there was a 111% increase in construction cost. Now, if you multiply that out, it's still south of the total dollar amount, but these are two very different projects of what we are trying to eventually accomplish. Again, we've already filled up the median, that means we're going to have to go to the outside, buy a right-of-way, do more construction. And then I remind you too, the south end of that project is only one lane, and it's squeezed in the middle, and it's only one lane wide. So we're going to have to be very innovative, which means probably more bridges, more aerial to limit right-of-way impact on a very constrained corridor. You get into more bridges, high-level kind of things, bridges that fly over and back into the middle. So our goal is, again, to use the existing right-of-way and real estate we have, and there's some wide areas there at Eagles Landing, Hudson Bridge, down sort of on the south side, on the northern side, there's some wide right-of-way that we absolutely will use, but there's a lot that will just be total interstate reconstruction. It'll be very complex.
And if I understand right, the roughly $1.8 billion added to the amended budget is just getting you started.
That's correct.
There will be more money borrowed, and that debt will be serviced through the fees, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Chairman Jaspers, do you have anything for the commissioner?
You know, I know your guys are very available to us. I know a lot of members are getting texted questions, but one that comes up the most, Commissioner, is on resurfacing. And, you know, it's what we all in here see every day. We get the complaints about. And I guess, what is the pent-up demand? I know that we check our roads every other year. We know the grade of them. And, you know, we've got increased money for paving. But I think members want to know what's the demand, because you know I'm always trying to ask for more money, and sometimes don't have real accurate numbers. But I'd sure like to know what's the demand. I don't know if you can answer that right now. Or
yeah, let me give you sort of just a ballpark answer. There is, I go back to that data point of resurfacing's increased by 51% over the last 4 years. So we got, I think you'd agree that most of our conditions are pretty good. We have key performance indicators for all our roads, and we're almost hitting some of the targets. Some of the targets we're right on. So we're sort of close to where we need state of good repair in a system, but that we got there several years ago. So if your money's going half as far, that's going to tell you that's about what we need. So on average, we're somewhere around $370 to $400 million a year to resurface state routes and interstates. Sort of the other concern, though, is our interstates. I like to say all of them have a knee replacement, a hip replacement, and are eligible for Social Security. A lot of the original interstate pavement has lived its life, and we're having to spend significant amount of money. Just as a word of warning, we are rebuilding I-285 from the airport on the west side up to Cobb County, up through Cobb County this summer. So don't go over there. All right. Stay away.
Yep.
But the point is, that pavement is worn out. We're having to rebuild it. But I think the anecdotal answer is pretty easy. 51% cost increase. We were pretty good on our state of good repair, sort of where we are. But that means you about need to double the budget, right? I mean, so you need that. You know, where we're at 375 or 400, you probably need to be like, 800 million a year.
Thank you.
Commissioner, appreciate you, and members, I'm sorry we're just short on time, so I'm going to ask Director of Planning Janine Miller to come up and give us her presentation, and probably just hit the highlights so we can make best use of this last 10 minutes.
Yes, sir. I've got a lot of data points, but I will go through them quickly. Good morning. It is great to be with you all here today. Thank you for your time and your attention to transportation, which we know is the arteries of our economy, of our communities, and our families. Quickly, the CERTA budget, the 2026 budget included money for the infrastructure bank, as it does every year through the Transportation Trust Fund. We are excited to have reported that we have awarded all of those dollars to 13 projects around the state, including the northwest corner, Cherokee and Cumberland CID, around Truist Ballpark to support movement there around that economic center, all the way down to Seminole County and Iron City there, as well as Twin City and Emmanuel County, and up and over to Athens, Clark County. So we have been able to award 13 projects around the state thanks to your investment there. We also have our current round is open. So there is a card on your desk with a QR code there for your local communities to apply for those dollars through February 13th. So would love to get more applications from around the state again this year. As the commissioner said, I'm going to talk about the I-75 South Corridor, but I always have to start with, in transportation, our logistics-enabled businesses. Since Governor Kemp took office, there have been $113 billion of announcements of private investment throughout the state, and 88% of those announcements have been in logistics-enabled companies. In other words, there's a requirement for inbound cargo for the company to operate and employ Georgians, and outbound goods to market and consumers. 74 billion, or 65% of the total dollar amount, that is over the past 6-7 years, has gone towards logistics-enabled businesses, employing over time, as these projects roll out, 157,000 jobs throughout the state. So this is a critical industry for the state of Georgia that relies on our transportation system all day, every day. I want to talk about congestion in Metro Atlanta. I think you all have probably felt it, if not on your way to and from the Capitol here, but throughout the year. In fact, last year, the most recent publication of a company called INRIX, this is a world-renowned data analytics company for transportation, ranked Georgia as number 7th in the country for worst traffic and delay. That is 16th in the world is Atlanta. That's incredible. That's a 23% increase in the hours lost to traffic in the past 2 years, the 3rd most increase in the U.S. And the other metro areas that had worse traffic growth than Atlanta were Baltimore and Philadelphia. And those were for one-time events. You may recall that the unfortunate bridge collapse in Baltimore caused a great deal of congestion there, as well as there were issues with the Philadelphia's transit system, significant safety issues that shut that down. Were it not for those very unique one-time events, Atlanta would have had the worst traffic growth in the country since 2023. Last year, people sitting in Atlanta traffic lost 75 hours. That's 50% higher than the U.S. average. And what does that look like on our roadways? On the left is red to green. Since 2019, we have had basically the population of the city of Newark, New Jersey, moved to Metro Atlanta, and the roads got worse. Some of them got better. They're in green on the left, but all the rest of them got worse. On the right, you can see the degree to which they got worse. And this corridor, I-75 in South Metro area, the lifeline to northern Georgia through Metro Atlanta, had the worst traffic. And this is midday. This is middle of the day. This is not rush hour. And these are the times, as the commissioner mentioned, when we are reversing the direction of the lane. Express lanes are a great choice for Metro Atlantans or anyone traveling through Georgia. Since 2011, when we opened the I-85 corridor, we have had significant growth. In fact, in the last 2 years, since we've gotten those really bad traffic numbers and data, we've had a 12.6% increase in the use of our express lanes. That's system-wide. A little zoom in here on the I-75 South Corridor, 5 million trips. We've had an 84% growth in trips since fiscal 18 when it opened. It is currently 12 miles long, although, as the commissioner said, it's only 2 miles for portions of it and 1 lane in each direction for a couple of miles on the south. This is what it looks like to the average traveler who's doing a Google Maps search. How long is it going to take me to get through the corridor? In the morning, northbound, the lane is going in the northbound direction. And using the toll lane, it would take 10 to 16 minutes to get through there. 80% increase, though, if you're trying to get through that corridor in the afternoon. And you might say, well, 10 minutes is not that big of a deal. Well, actually, that lane would provide a 21 mile an hour increase in speed through that corridor if that lane were going in the northbound direction. And you multiply this might just be what you see on your phone for your trip, but you multiply this by the number of people every day who cannot get into the lane, average about 100,000 people every day who cannot get into the express lane. So we have something in transportation analytics. This is how it looks to us as transportation professionals, a road report card, levels of service. It's it's an A, B, or C, you're doing well. If you're an F, you are failing. And these general purpose lanes are failing Metro Atlanta travelers. And by 2050, this is all day. Do you see that red? All day long. This is an all-day model. There is not a way to get through this corridor at any hour of the day in 2050 with any ease or speed. That is all what we can predict, but of course we cannot predict crashes. So compound onto those data points the growth in traffic and the delay. What is caused, the slowdowns that are caused by unpredictable crashes is quite severe throughout this corridor, particularly on the northern side. So there is no way to get around these crashes when the lane is going in the other direction. By the numbers, this is the real data, okay? This is the roll-up of our most recent month of data we were able to gather in December of 2025. Time and money lost by the numbers, 193,000 average vehicles per day. That is 334,000 vehicle hours of delay in just the month of December. Every person lost 9.3 hours that month to traffic on that corridor. And so you have to budget 80% additional more time to get through that corridor on schedule. And the cost to the economy is real. $15.5 million is the cost of that unreliability. But what's very interesting is where those cars and trucks are coming from and going to. The darker the gray, the more trips originate and depend on that corridor there in the center of the state to get through. So it's not just the express lane, it's all of the general purpose lanes that are dealing with this traffic. And once we have a lane going in both directions, there will be 70% more vehicles that can pass through this corridor. And I say vehicles, it's not just cars. 18 to 20% of the vehicles getting through this corridor, attempting to get through this corridor, are trucks. They carry $620 million a day of freight value. In a year, that's $226 billion. That is roughly 25% of the value of freight moving in Georgia goes through this corridor and sits in that traffic. This corridor has also been named by the American Trucking Associations as the worst freight corridor bottleneck in the country. It's number 12. 1 through 11 are all interchanges. This is the number 1 worst corridor in the country for trucks.
Director, we're getting some looks on time at the back door, and Rules Chairman has come in, and so we're going to clear this room. But thank you for that quick presentation, and we may ask you back to either this committee or Chairman Jaspers so we can have time to ask you some questions.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Hey, members, if you would take your packets with you when you go to make it easier for Rules to come in and occupy the room. Appreciate you. We're adjourned.
That's how you do that.
All right, yep.
Hey, let me